Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're kind of on a treasure hunt, really. We're looking through your sources to find the absolute best performance upgrade for a real classic, the Tamiya ORV chassis. You know, the one of them, Mighty Frog, the Subaru BRAT, our mission. Find that perfect, competition-level shock absorber to really wake up these vintage racers.
Yeah, we've gone pretty depth here, looked at the original design thinking, manufacturer warnings, hop-up guides, all sorts. The goal is to find something precision engineered that can genuinely transform how these old buggies handle.
Okay, so first off, why is this specific upgrade, the rear shock, such a big deal for the ORV, and why is it tricky?
Well, the ORV, right from '83, it had this independent trailing arm rear suspension. Pretty unique.
Yeah.
But the shocks aren't mounted directly up and down. They lay kind of flat, connected through this bell crank linkage.
Right, that crank-actuated system. And what does that do performance-wise?
Well, that introduces some serious leverage. It basically means any tiny bit of friction or, any inconsistency inside the shock absorber.
Right.
It gets magnified big time by the linkage.
Okay, so friction is extra bad here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But flip that around if you put in a truly smooth, really low friction damper, the improvement is huge, way bigger than you'd expect. That smoothness just translates incredibly well through that linkage. It's a key point.
Interesting. And there's another layer to this, isn't there? Your sources mentioned the original '83 chassis. It's not quite the same as the re-releases from, 2005 onwards.
That's right. Yeah, that's a critical point. The main difference is in the A parts, the plastic bits the shocks mount to. On the re-release, the source material says they have inverted length of the shock mounts compared to the vintage kits.
Inverted length. So
Yeah.
the mounting points are different.
Effectively, yes. It changes the upper shock mount position, the angle.
Yeah.
It affects how the damper fits and works. And it's not just speculation. Some third-party shock makers actually warn that their shocks might be too short for the original vintage chassis. So that confirms there's a real physical difference.
Okay, so we've got leverage magnifying everything and differences between the vintage and newer chassis. How did you figure out the sweet spot for the shock length then?
Well, we had to cross-reference a bit, kind of triangulate. Tamiya's own CVA short shock set 2, that's part number 50520. They recommend that one for the Monster Beetle, which is ORV-based. And those shocks measure 80 millimeters, eye to eye.
Okay, so 80 millimeters is one data point from Tamiya themselves.
Right. Then we looked at a high-end aftermarket suspension conversion kit. Their setup guides suggested that the optimal length is actually more like 75 to 78 millimeters, using some internal spacers. So putting those together gave us a really clear target. We need a top-tier TRF damper that's somewhere in the, let's say, 75 millimeter to 80 millimeter range, out to eye.
Right. And TRF, Tamiya Racing Factory, they make a lot of dampers. How did that length help narrow it down?
Oh, hugely. I mean, most TRF dampers are for on-road touring cars, right? Things like the hashtag 42102 special damper, that's like 55 millimeter. Or the super short big bore ones, or even shorter, 48.5 millimeters. They're just way, way too short for what we need on the ORV rear. So ruling those out, our deep dive pointed pretty clearly to one specific set, the Tamiya TRF Buggy Aeration Oil-Filled Damper Set. That's hop-up option number 54028.
Ah, the Buggy Aeration set. And why is that the one?
Well, serendipity almost. That set actually comes with 2 pairs of dampers, long ones around 92 millimeters and short ones, which are exactly 75 millimeters, so perfect fit for our target range. The longer 92 millimeters, well, they'll just be spares for this particular RV project.
Okay, so the length is spot on at 75 millimeter. But what about the aeration part? What makes these dampers technically better than, say, the standard CVA plastic ones or even older TRF designs?
Right, good question. So aeration dampers are different from the older style that use a rubber diaphragm to separate the oil and air. Here, the oil and air actually mix, and what that does is create progressive damping. As the shock compresses, especially towards the end of its travel, the damping force increases.
So it gets firmer the more it's squashed.
Exactly. Which is brilliant for handling big jumps or rough terrain. It helps prevent the chassis from slapping down hard, bottoming out, which can be a weakness on the ORV. Plus, these are TRF spec. So you get the hard, black-coated aluminum bodies, super slippery titanium-coated piston rods, just incredibly smooth. And as we said, that smoothness is exactly what the ORV's high-leverage suspension needs to work its best.
Makes sense. So fitting them. You mentioned the chassis difference earlier. Is it plug and play?
For the modern re-release chassis, pretty much, yeah. Should bolt right on. But for the original, vintage ORV chassis, because of that slightly different upper mount geometry we talked about.
Right, the inverted length.
Yeah. You'll likely need to add a small spacer, maybe 2 millimeter or 3 millimeters thick, on the upper shock mounting screw between the chassis and the shock top. This just corrects the angle slightly, stops the shock from binding as the suspension moves. It's a small tweak, but pretty critical to get the full benefit.
Gotcha. So a little finesse needed for the vintage models, and the payoff for doing all this. What should you expect?
Oh, it should be dramatic. Really noticeable improvement in how it handles rough ground, much better control on jumps and especially landings, and just more stability when cornering because the damping is so much more consistent and well sophisticated. Plus, you get tuning options. You can play with different shock oil weights, maybe start with Tamiya's #400 medium oil and piston choice, like use the 2-hole pistons for more stability, or the 3-hole for a plusher feel over bumps.
So it sounds like this TRF buggy aeration set, the 54E0218, is really the definitive answer for a top-tier rear shock upgrade on the ORV.
Yeah, I think based on the sources, it really is. It hits that specific length requirement perfectly. The technology directly addresses the ORV's needs, the smoothness for the leverage, the progressive damping for jumps. It takes a bit of understanding, maybe a tiny bit of fiddling on the vintage ones, but equipping this classic buggy with truly world-class dampers, the performance potential is just unlocked.
It really shows, doesn't it, that even with these older classic designs, if you dig deep and apply the right modern tech with precision, you can push them way beyond what you might expect. Makes you wonder, what other hidden potential might be waiting in classic designs? You just look beyond the obvious upgrades.